speaker, Petra Boynton, who's a consultant and author of the Research Companion. Petra is a social psychologist who supports a wide variety of research organisations and government departments to undertake and use research in inclusive, accessible and safe ways, with a key focus on mental health and well-being. And the latter are topics which I think are of increasing importance to the research community and have been focused on by many for some years. I think in certain aspects of research culture, not enough attention has been paid. So it's great to have Petra with us today. Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I hope you can all hear me okay.
We can see and hear you clearly.
Good, thank you very much. So I'm delighted to be here because I think of all the things I like talking about research, this is my favourite thing to discuss. And it's the very basic things that we often forget about, those sort of how-tos, the skills that everyone thinks everybody knows but probably never gets taught, and somewhere along the line you're supposed to have them. And my focus really today is to think about confidence. So how can we identify the problems that are going on around the basic stuff so we can teach and practice that better to help people feel more confident in the work they're doing, and in turn I think reduce some of the stress and problems that we are experiencing and seeing in academia and elsewhere at the moment. If you've got examples of good practice to share while I'm talking, and I'm sure a lot of you will have, please put that in the chat, because it's always good to learn from other projects you're doing. There's always a tendency with talks like this that I'll sit here and say everything that's wrong, and you'll be sitting there going, but I've been working on that and I've been getting it right. So please do share examples of good practice. I know that UKB are also going to share their resources that might relate to what I'm talking about, and also through other speakers through the day. And you can again go and look at the website for a lot of things to help you do your research well. If you've got questions, as mentioned, please stick them in the chat. I will try and answer as many of them as I can, but I suspect there'll probably be more questions than I'll get time to do, in which case I will make sure I've answered them as we go through the day, so they should be there for you to see later on. So I wanted to talk about really the I don't knows of research. There's a broad range of issues that we should be covering research training, but we aren't. And I don't think I'm going to tell you anything new today. I don't think there's anything that you'll think, oh my gosh, yes, that's a stunning new finding. More likely you'll think, oh yeah, actually this has been something we've been concerned about for a while. And again, as we're dealing with sort of pandemics and all sorts of changes to research culture and increasing demands on our time and bureaucracy and everything else that goes with it, these small things that actually aren't small things at all get lost and they get missed. So I wanted to share with you a few things that have come up through the training I've been doing just in this last month. And these are the I don't know how to things that I hear so often. It's things, oops, sorry, I'll go back one. These are questions that people ask me, and on the surface, they seem like things that everybody should know. But actually, of course, these are things that a lot of us don't know how to do, or perhaps don't want to do. Or maybe we did get some training once, but we've forgotten how to do it, or we're aware things have changed and moved on. Or perhaps we had a bad experience. It can be all sorts of things, but the kind of things that I'm asked about a lot, and certainly came up this month, were how to select a research topic, ways to be more productive. How can you be motivated when you get awful feedback, or even okay feedback, but you've got to respond to reviewer comments? How did you do that? How can you advocate for yourself? In this case, it says in research, but advocacy more generally within research spaces. Networking, meeting people, communicating with colleagues. How do we collect data? Managing time, agreeing authorship, and avoiding plagiarism. How to obtain ethics approval. You might think, looking at those, oh, well, that must be questions coming in from very inexperienced researchers, or perhaps people who are very new to research. But actually, these come from people across the world at all levels of their career. And one of the things I think we need to think about is that a lot of people don't get the how-to training when they start. And as they become more and more senior, it becomes harder to ask. You don't want to admit that you don't know it. Often you don't know what you don't know. So you're continuing doing stuff that you thought was the right thing without realizing there's a whole load of other ways you might do it that could be easier or more accessible or more effective. So if you think about that list there, I expect there are lots of topics you can see that you are also asked about perhaps in your practice. It might be checking down that list that you think, actually, you know what, I can't do those things either. I don't know how to do those things. Or I do, but I'm not that confident. I couldn't teach it. I couldn't support other people in doing it. My goal today isn't to sort of train you up in all these things. Which sort of runs a bit counter to talking about confidence. I don't want to leave you thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do lots of stuff. It's more to draw attention to the fact that there's these small how-to activities that are actually big things that we probably need to go back to and attend to and make integral to our teaching and practice. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the kind of questions I'm asked. And I'm asked these whether I'm doing training or on social media or via email. Now, this isn't a genuine question. I've mocked this up based on the kind of questions I'm asked about a lot. But it's very much indicative of the sort of thing I'm asked about. And many of you might recognize this kind of question too. So it says, I'm the first in my family to go to university and in my final year of my PhD. My supervisor has been absent throughout my analysis and writing up. The doctoral programme has some online materials on writing I've used, but it doesn't feel adequate. I'm due to submit my thesis soon, but I worry major problems will only be revealed in the viva. I asked my supervisor what standard a thesis needs to pass, but they said it can't be determined until the viva. How can I prepare more effectively? Now, this is focusing on a doctoral student, a doctoral candidate, but we hear this from undergraduates, we hear it from postgraduates, early career researchers, people working on research projects in the communities, in charities, in local government, in all sort of spheres where research takes place. There are issues around uncertainty, a lack of preparedness, a poor standard of supervision or absent supervision, and people not knowing what they should be doing. They don't know what they, in this case, they have no idea what their work should be like, the standard of work, and they're very, very anxious. And they're being told, well, it'll all be revealed in the viva, but that's a very risky strategy and not particularly good advice. And in this case, the person is trying to clarify, is the supervisor correct and they just need to get on with it? And is what they've experienced normal, or is there actually something else to it? So what we do know is there is a problem, and I think we need to accept it and be ready to deal with it, that there is a lack of training and ongoing support for supervisors and managers of research. Some institutions are brilliant and they supervise supervisors and they give them ongoing help. But in a lot of cases, if you've done research, you're assumed to know how to supervise and teach it. And this is very much the case, I think, in settings outside universities, but also extremely common within universities too. Supervisors, and this isn't just PhD supervisors, it's anyone who's managing research, have often been taught poorly themselves, so they can often repeat mistakes or they admit things because they don't know what they should be covering. We still tend to value the doing of research rather than the teaching of research, and certainly the supervising of research. And when it comes onto the pastoral care aspects of research, that is very much down the bottom of the list and very often gendered as well. So it's a task that is assumed to be passed on to people who are earlier in their careers, predominantly women, but also people who are minoritized in other ways. So LGBTQ plus scholars, Black scholars, disabled scholars particularly, may find themselves having to take on additional supervisory work that they're not supported and prepared for, that other people do not want to do. We then have issues around opportunities for learning being lost if the managerial or supervisory relationship is one where instead of teaching and instructing and helping people develop, it's about collect my data or perform my experiments. Yes, you do learn something from that, but you're often missing out on a lot of things. And that continues to be a big problem, particularly in STEM, but also in parts of the social sciences, healthcare and humanities as well. I don't think we can ignore either the fact that we are working in very often competitive, toxic, publish or perish environments. The pandemic has undoubtedly made that worse, and the shifts on, offline, on again has also added levels of stress. But things that are going on in our lives, the cost of living crisis, global conflicts, all sorts of other changes that are happening are making it really difficult outside and inside our research environments to get work work done. And you're in those environments, it's really hard to be creative, to be productive, to be supportive, and to teach and learn. You know, it's meetings get cancelled, people can't go, people, you know, will put aside supervision sessions or learning sessions or you know, any opportunity to do things because they are very busy. So that means our time and space to learn and to reflect is reduced. And we also have still, sadly, this idea that suffering is a badge of honor. I really had hoped that that had gone, but it hasn't. It's been outlawed, I think, in a lot of places, but still in many sort of supervisory relationships or academic cultures, this idea that your authentic researcher experience is one of overwork, exhaustion, competitive sort of, you know, almost competitive suffering, but who is basically having it worse. And you can only sort of go on social media and look at the sort of meme culture, particularly of postgraduates, but other academics, about the fact that, you know, we thrive on coffee. What is sleep? You know, reviewer 2 is out to get me. There's a whole kind of thing that this is supposed to be unpleasant and difficult. And I think one of the things when we're talking about research confidence is that actually, you know, why is that such a prevailing idea? It's not just a myth, it's very much people's experience. But why can't it be joyous and enjoyable and exciting? You know, a lot of us are drawn to this because we love research and we love finding out and we love aspects of research, you know, really quite often minoritized aspects of research that we like getting into. So why can't that be happy and positive? You know, we know why. It's those aforementioned very toxic influences on us. But working through that, particularly when a lot of these things are ingrained in systems and work to benefit those systems, is a real problem. We also have a sort of lack of partnerships, silo working. People will often do their own thing. They're not drawing stuff together. They're not learning in a cross-disciplinary way. And we have a particular issue at the moment that I think there's a centering of American and Northern European and Australian STEM sort of worries, concerns, problems, but also solutions that are abstract from other global contexts, other historical contexts, other work that's been done before. And in particular, I think low-income scholars in communities and countries elsewhere are really, really disadvantaged by that. So really, we've got to think about, you know, how many of us are expecting to do things that are complex and difficult and are way beyond our skills and capacity without the basic training that we should have had beforehand. And what is that actually doing to us? On the left-hand side of my screen, it's probably the right-hand side of yours, I've got a copy here of the Nature's global survey of graduate students. They run this every year and have been doing so for a while, and it's making for increasingly sad reading, really, in that a lot of scholars are losing faith. They don't want to really do it anymore. They're wondering what's the point. The issues about precarity and pay are a real problem, but also lack of supervision while you're getting on with your work and support, and also career prospects. Where are we going? There's a lot of uncertainty in the research community about where your career could be headed, not just whether you're going into an academic or a university career, but if you want to do research in other places. Quite often we're poor at explaining that there's loads of ways we can use research skills and loads of places we're doing research, and celebrating that and honouring that and respecting it, that people are doing really great research in all kinds of contexts, not just in a laboratory somewhere in America. You know, there's lots and lots of places where research is being done, and by lots and lots of different people. What we do know from a range of studies now is that consistently about a third of people, be they undergraduate, masters, PhD level, or others who are doing dissertation research, are unhappy about the kind of supervision they have. We tend not to look at other support staff, but support staff working in research are also reporting problems with a lack of management, lack of equipment, a lack of training, and poor work environments. What we do seem to be seeing, and again, this is coming out from sort of multiple pieces of research, is that everything kind of needs to be joined up for it to work. So we need a kind of whole campus, a whole practice approach. If you've got a good supervisor or a good manager and good tuition and good support and a good environment that's healthy, and you are outlawing bullying, and you're addressing things, and it's safe to work in, and it's enjoyable to work in, and you can address some of these more negative factors like sort of overwork and precarity and competition. If you have that like a sort of jigsaw that everything slots together, it works. But if you've got part of these puzzles missing, it quickly falls apart. So you could have an absolutely amazing manager or really wonderful colleagues, but if the rest of your department is massively underfunded, or the rest of the environment you're in is very negative or hostile, or you don't feel safe there, then you can't progress. In the same way as you could have a really, really great institution that you're working for, but the person you're immediately responsible to report into or look after is somebody you can't cope with or isn't giving you what you need, that again can cause problems. So when we're thinking around these sort of context of these how-tos, and you'll notice I haven't actually come on to talking about them much yet, the environment needs to be sorted beforehand. So it's, again, as we heard earlier, the sort of social and cultural aspects that need to be working first. So who is disadvantaged by not sorting out our how-tos? Well, arguably all of us are disadvantaged if we're not sorting out the basics of research, training and supervision and support. But there are particular categories, many of them that actually interlink, where scholars, researchers are going to struggle. So anybody on a low income, obviously, it's going to be an issue. And obviously where you've got institutions that are underfunding research or not paying properly, or you've got precarious contracts, that adds to it. And the cost of living crisis outside doesn't help. People who are estranged from families, I'll come on to that in a minute. Those from an ethnic minority background, who are disabled or have learning difficulties, who are physically or mentally unwell, either before they came into the institution or because the institution and its lack of care or supervision or support is actually causing or worsening their health issues. Those who are parents or carers, who are self-funding, part-timers, LGBTQ+, people who are on placements or doing field work, international scholars and researchers, those who are older or mature, working or studying remotely, women and first generation. And those are predominantly disadvantaged because either it's to do with time and capacity, it's to do with energy, it's to do with what they may have missed, or perhaps that they didn't have before they arrived within research institutions, or that it was always assumed that they would know, and that perhaps to do with confidence or to do with prejudice or to do with a lack of access, they've never been able to find out. They've had to work it out on their own, or perhaps not been able to. Now, if you don't know what to do, how do you access support to do your job? If the support is there, but you don't know it's there, that's hard, but it might not be there at all. If you do this, if there's not the support systems there and they're not the basic training and learning, you're much more likely to make mistakes. It's not going to be your fault. You aren't going to know what you're supposed to be doing. However, if you do make mistakes and you're particularly from a minoritized background, and particularly from a stigmatized background, you're much more likely to be blamed. You may well be used to this already. For example, if you're disabled, you'll be used to ableism in wider life. And so therefore, you may lack the confidence to ask for help. But you're also more likely to blame yourself if something goes wrong, even if it wasn't your fault. And you're more likely to be blamed. And sadly, I think a lot of research culture, when it's not working as it should, will stereotype groups and blame them and say, well, this person's done something wrong, so everybody from that group is going to equally be unreliable, or they can't do this work and we can't give them these opportunities. So therefore, the cycle continues. And it's horrible working in an environment where you feel like you don't belong, or that people are suspicious of you, or they don't give you chances, or when you do your very best, it's never good enough. But combinations of factors of these at-risk groups can make things worse. So, for example, we all heard on the news yesterday that in the UK, the proposition now is that international students can no longer bring families with them. So say you're an international student, perhaps you're working in an additional language, you're learning a new culture, you are studying and you haven't been taught the basics of how to do your research. No one's explained processes to you or systems to you, bearing in mind every university department, let alone university or research environment or council or charity, has their own ways of doing stuff that you've got to work out within the wider context of core good research. So say you're an international student and you are not having this support, and you are now estranged forcibly by actions of the state that you cannot be with your family, you are now totally isolated from the work that you should be doing. So we're not just talking about the sort of academic environments or research environments that nurture the how-tos and help us to get work done and support us, that very often we're having strategies and practices that are put in place that make it impossible for people who are already marginalized to do better. Another example might be that it's not so much that the scholars themselves are not given the basic how-tos, but that we as managers and as supervisors and as organizers don't think about things from multiple perspectives. So a really common example of that is organizing conferences in countries where being LGBTQ plus is illegal. You know, it makes it particularly difficult, for example, for a gay scholar to feel safe to go and do field work there, or to study there, or to participate in an event. It's why in many ways these online activities have become such a blessing, because they're not accessible to everybody, but they make a lot of people able to join things that they wouldn't able to do normally. Another example is the idea that you assume everyone's got a credit card and can pay up front for a conference, and that at some point in months later, with your incomprehensible paperwork, everybody can actually access that money that they've had to wait for. There's a lot of real hidden assumptions under these how-tos that actually, once you start to peel away, you realize that they are really, really discriminatory to a lot of people. So one thing I would invite you to do is to go over all your policies and all your practices, or all your regulations, or everything you're being told you should do, and ask, who is it bringing in and leaving out? Who is it helping or harming? How am I being advantaged or disadvantaged by this? And what does it mean for other people who are like me and not like me? Now, when we think about research integrity, I love this diagram because it kind of has a whole load of stuff around it of values that we should be having around respect and honesty. And I wanted to just take the little box up here with honesty, where it says that, you know, for research, we need to be thinking about sort of honesty in terms of our planning, our methods, our data collection, giving credit, reporting, and how we interpret the work we're doing. Now, all of those things are brilliant. Everything in this diagram with all the different categories are really helpful for us. And just in case that you are unable to see what's on the slide here, we'll be sharing these afterwards with information about what's contained within them, so that you can read all of it in full. For the purpose of this talk, you don't need to be able to see all of it in full, although I appreciate that might be frustrating, so I can put that in the chat later if you aren't able to see this in full at the moment. But let's go back to say honesty, and there's all these breakdowns of different activities: planning, methods, data collection, credit, and such like. Each of those has many, 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 many subcategories and tasks. And when you start taking them back to it, there's a lot of very basic tasks that actually, if you think about planning, all the things you need to be able to do to plan research are very, very complicated. And you probably get told the high level stuff and that you should be able to do this, but you possibly don't get told the basic stuff, which means you can't do the planning in the first place. So to put this to the test, let's have a quick game of bingo here. And what I want you to do, oops, sorry, I've gone back off the slide, is I'm just going to go over, have you ever been formally taught how to do these things? So I don't mean that you learn on the job like I did. I mean that you were actually formally taught, and possibly more than once. So not just like a kind of quick webinar or a meeting where somebody said you should be able to do this, that somebody actually explained this to you and went through it with you. So have you been taught how to email a colleague or participants in research and manage their replies? You know, have you been taught to manage your inbox? Have you been taught how to create a recruitment strategy, including people who don't want to be in your research, assuming you're doing research with human participants? Even if you're not doing research with human participants, you'll still be networking and navigating. So have you been taught how to do that? You know, has anyone taught you how to design an inclusive, engaging, accessible invitation for your research, or an advert for your research, or a poster? Or if you're doing a conference, you know how to make those aspects of your work more accessible? Do you know how to manage a project from start to end, including obtaining funding, applying theory to practice, practice the theory? Can you give and receive feedback? And do you know how to peer review or be peer reviewed? Has anyone formally taught you how to do that? Because most cases, we don't get taught it, we're just expected to just do it. Can you effectively address the emotional and physical safety of students or staff or colleagues or yourself? We talked about planning earlier, but planning and piloting and revising your research, your teaching, your pastoral care. Has anyone taught you how to manage that? Because it's an enormous job, you know, but there are ways of doing it, but has anyone taught you? Entering, cleaning, maintaining and storing data with a particular focus on legal requirements for your country, state or institution. Do you know how to work with on and offline communities and stakeholders? Can you use debriefing techniques through a lifespan of a project? Can you effectively use social media other than Twitter and other forms of dissemination that's not just a peer-reviewed paper or a report? And if you can, have you been formally taught how to do that? Do you understand what impact and sustainability mean and how to critically engage with those? And do you know how to make research welcoming for other people and for yourself? Now, some of you might be able to put your hand up now and go, yeah, House, I've been taught all of those, which is brilliant. It's rare that I've ever met anyone who has been formally taught these things. Most of us learn bits of it. We learn it maybe by making mistakes, or we might go sort of seek training, but it's kind of reactively. We're not told in advance we need to know this. Usually something goes wrong or somebody says, oh, do you know how to do so-and-so? And you think, no, and I don't want to admit that. So you go off and find a video or a book or something to help you. So say you had been taught these things. Have you been taught them in a way that means that your work is inclusive and accessible? Because that's often very much where we really go awry, that we have all these policies and practices and ways of doing things, but they're aimed at a particular cohort of people in a particular time and place, and they aren't going to work for everybody. And when they don't work for everybody, we think it's our fault and we did something wrong, rather than the fact that we're not being supported to do very basic jobs of, you know, writing emails or planning a project or thinking about piloting, or when we're asking people to be in our research, you know, it's not just about sticking logos from our institution all over it and having project numbers and study titles. It's actually about maybe making it that people can have alt text descriptions if we're sharing it on social media, or that we've got an easy read format, or that we're actually making it clear that we're asking people to be in a research and not offering them an opportunity for therapy or a job. You know, all these things quite are not really taught routinely. You know, we aren't really taught how to avoid inequalities and precarity and unbuilt harm, but that's what our work should be aiming to do. There are a lot of issues that we should be dismantling as we go and challenging the problems as we go. And that requires bravery, and it really is difficult. But when we're thinking about culture and confidence, it's a collective effort for us working together to make this good stuff happen. And I'm aware I'm doing the kind of worst thing that annoys me when other people do it, in that I'm telling you what to do and not how to do it. So, you know, afterwards, if there's stuff here that you're thinking, I have no idea how to make this stuff happen, what is she going on about? Put that question in the chat and I will send you some links and things as we go through today. Or again, a lot of this stuff will be on the UK Rio website that you can look at. And as some of you will be doing this in practice, so if you are, please put that in the chat too. You know, how do you do pastoral care and signpost to appropriate sources of support? A single helpline is not enough. I think that's what we're often taught about. And some institutions now are saying you mustn't do any pastoral care at all. You must, anyone in crisis has to be sent somewhere, you know, a phone number or somebody that they make an appointment with. You still know how to manage that situation carefully and with compassion. And a lot of us are not taught how to do that, which is why so many of the how-tos fall apart with the basic skills of planning or data management or designing a study, but people don't know how to ask for help. And then if they do get upset, particularly in supervisory situations or high pressure situations, we in turn are under so much pressure that we're dismissive, or we put more pressure on them, or we tell them we can't help, or to go away, or to, you know, just, you know, suffering is a badge of honor again. And finally, we're not expecting something for nothing or working for exposure. You know, our budgeting is often a problem, and we do expect that things will, you know, run on a lot of free labor. And that is a big, big problem within research. You know, we struggle with that. So how are we going to fix this? I've actually locked this cat out, both of my cats out today, because they have a habit of joining in at the wrong time. But this is a picture of one of my cats. As you can see, he's trying to fix my son's exam revision and failing. But outside of cat photos, which always helps us fix things, and cats that cheer us up, what else might we do? Or what do we need? Time and money. is the obvious one. But I think in a lot of cases, we actually need to start developing the really important research skill of saying no. That's not to be negative. It's the fact that if we can't do this because we don't have the time, the skills, the money, the energy, or whatever else, then we need to really think carefully about we're doing it. And I think that needs to also be pushed back towards institutions who are expecting us at a time when we are still living through a pandemic and we have got all these other things going on in the world, that we somehow or other have got boundless energy when we're absolutely exhausted to do more and more and more for less and less and less. So making this transparent, I think, is really important. But we also need instructions. We need to tell people what to expect, and we need to keep on and on doing that. It's particularly an issue when we're busy, we're stressed, if we're neurodivergent, if we have learning difficulties, that you can tell me this once. I can tell you all this today. And there's so much to take in. You're not going to remember this, by the time the next speaker comes on. Of course you're not. So we need to repeat this. It needs to be continual. We need to manage expectations. And we shouldn't be shaming people for this. It needs to continue as we go. It needs to be the fact that we have a place and a space to work on or offline with training and supervision that is embedded in all we're doing. And again, it's running across all we do, that there's space for reflection and feedback, that we can make mistakes, but we make mistakes in the right place. The place to make mistakes is not while you're out there doing hands-on research. It's while you're teaching and learning and practicing. And we need to have strategies in place when stuff goes wrong, because it always does. And maybe part of our practice is to say, the reason I'm here today talking about this, and I've been talking about this for a very long time, is that most of my research at one time or another has gone wrong. And quite a lot of it early on didn't so much go wrong, but was decidedly unsafe because I was having to make it up as I went along and nobody was supervising it. So we really need to be thinking about not micromanaging our work, but a lot more support earlier on and continual checking in with each other, and the feeling safe to say, I don't know how to do that. It's quite easy for me to say at this point in my career, I don't know how to do things. It's harder if you are early in your career or still learning, or you're a minoritized scholar that we heard about earlier. But also, I think if you're somebody who's really trying to build your career, that nobody wants to admit the fact that stuff is going wrong because you're scared that, perhaps you won't get research funding, or people think you're a liability. And I think also calling attention to the politicized aspects of this, people are reticent to do because, again, you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. And that is something that I think is a real problem in our research. So what else might we do? We can focus on this holistic focus of research, teaching and pastoral care. These are all integral to the work we do, whether it's in a university, whether it's studying, whether it's outside an institution, if it's in the third sector, NGOs, charities, or wherever it is we're working. What else can we think about doing? Well, there are some positive indications, as we've already heard. There's this recent House of Commons Science Innovation Technology Committee report on reproducibility and research integrity. And I actually said I can't see it, reproducibility right that time, because, that's something else with a lot of the things we have, is that there are these words and terminologies that we don't use. So with our how-tos, it's really good to have glossaries and a kind of no shame idea that sometimes we don't know what the words mean, or we can't say them. And it's not because we're not smart. We might be working across disciplines or across practices or across methodologies. So yes, there are some indications that this report can talk positively about, research environments. There are some possible changes coming up with the REF. We'll wait and see on that. Other professional organisations like the British Psychological Society are currently consulting on the way that we teach research methods, particularly to undergraduates. But I think that these changes, although they're in the right direction, and the fact that we're talking about this now, which is great, and we weren't doing this as much, in the past, this is a growing and positive movement. It really, really is. These changes are not without criticism, and we should be able to ask about, who is being included and excluded by them. And I think also, what are they prioritising? So we're still on high level issues. We're still on a lot to do with misconduct for good reasons. We're very much focusing around the replication crisis. It's more skewed towards quantitative research. There's a lot of worry about AI. And again, that's all absolutely fine. But while we're worrying about whether robots are writing our essays, we're probably also not looking at the fact that somebody doesn't know how to access the library or do a proper search, or, keep themselves safe whilst collecting data. And actually, a lot of the things that we've got worries about with the higher levels, if we don't sort out the how-tos, they're more likely to become a problem. An unsupported student is much more likely to use a system to help write their essays, or even an essay mill, than they are to do it themselves. So fixing the lower end of stuff is definitely a good idea if we're worried about these higher ends. What else might we do? I won't go into this too much because I've been already talking about it, but this poor or inconsistent delivery of research tuition and practice. We've got an issue that some institutions are brilliant. Some departments are brilliant. Some individual supervisors and managers in different settings are really, really good, but it's inconsistent. And that is a real issue about equality and fairness and ethics. It's not fair that some people are having brilliant support and other people's are having to struggle. It should be across the board that basic standards are being met. We need to think about how we teach research methods across all sectors. It's generally, as you can tell from me, it's the most exciting thing. I love this. I didn't love it when I started. I thought it was the most boring. I couldn't bear research methods. It was the most boring thing I'd ever thought about. But when you start getting into the aspects of it and actually working with problems and dilemmas and the ways that we can do that really well, it's fascinating. And we can do it really well if we teach real world research skills, that we do things about sourcing information, synthesizing it, sharing it. That's particularly important for undergraduate degrees, because the vast number of undergraduates, even though they're supposed to do a research dissertation, are not going to go on to do research careers, but they are going to use research skills in their later jobs and their other lives. So there's also the idea of using responsive, exciting, creative approaches, lots of case studies, lots of dilemmas, maybe group projects rather than individual projects, particularly as we're seeing this moving more towards A-level now, that group activities is probably a lot better to build confidence, to have practical skills, and to reduce risk and waste. That we're going to embed welfare, rights, dignity and respect and well-being central to all that we do, that we don't just have mental health as some sort of abstract thing and a kind of occasional well-being day that we brand all over our institution and we don't do anything else the rest of the time, or we don't make the connection that a lot of our policies, practices and institutional constructs are making people disadvantaged or unwell. And that means we check that EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, is more than just a tick box, and we don't make that the burden of people who are already minoritized and possibly don't even want to do it. We hold research institutions more accountable for policies, practices and promises. I appreciate that this is always the thing that stops me getting an invite to other events. But, actually we are being required as researchers to do all kinds of things. And there's lots of promises that, for example, we're going to eradicate bullying and stuff that, I first published a work on bullying in academia in 2005, and I'm still having to pester people to let me come and talk at a high level to fix this problem. And we're still having meetings where another new group of people who haven't got the agency to bring change talk about standards or teaching or bullying or atmosphere or welfare, and we don't bring any change. So I think we need to have proactive and not reactive approaches. We know enough about this stuff now around training, teaching, welfare, well-being, integrity, to embed it through all that we do. And that we target specific problems. I've put here misuse of online surveys because it's my current real dislike, but there are particular areas where we can see stuff has gone quite wrong, that the pandemic has made worse, and in terms of integrity and ethics we can go in and zoom in on that quickly and thoroughly and in interesting ways and tackle it. The misuse of online surveys is always an interesting one because you can show how many terrible examples there are out there. So in order to prioritise this, we just need to have greater awareness, joined up whole organisation approaches that are inclusive and accessible, and that we put the pastoral care at the middle. And I say all we need to do because I know this is actually challenging and really difficult. And I am conscious that I may not have talked about all the things in detail we need to do today. So I would hope this is a dialogue that we continue to have, that if we want to do more on this, that we bring ourselves together and we share good practice, we ask for more training, we again hold funders and other organisations responsible for this to help us and to do something about the problems we can see, and that we celebrate the brilliant stuff that we are doing, because we love the how-tos. This basic stuff isn't the boring stuff, it's not the afterthought, it's not the unnecessary stuff, it's really important. So that's all I want to say. I'm going to try and do a couple of your questions if I can, but thank you for listening. If you want to contact me, I'm at Dr. Petra on Twitter. You can email me there, or you can contact me through UKRIO, or you can bung something in the chat today, or in a Q&A would be better. And you have to do this, obviously, it's an obligatory plug. The Being Well in Academia isn't actually the book about how to do research. It's one of my other books, but it's about the how to sort of cope if you are finding things difficult, and find ways to support one another as we sort of collectively go through. So I'm going to have a quick look now in the Q&As and see if there's any I can do. If that's all right with you, James?
Absolutely. Or do you want me to?
Do you want to pick some? That might be better, so I don't avoid the hard ones.
Been keeping up. We've had loads of questions. Petra, thank you for really insightful and really. It's a talk that's got people going. The chat's alive. The Q&A is full. We have about 8 minutes for questions, so we appreciate being able to cover everybody, but we will work with Petra to follow up what questions we can't answer today. So going back to those questions, what advice do you have for newcomers in the field who are finishing their masters and about to enter into the fray of, doing research?
The main thing is, if you are going to do that, is talk to other people, find people who are a little bit further ahead in their careers than you are, to see what their experiences have been. If you're thinking about going from a master's to a PhD, check out the institutions first, make sure you've got information about funding, look at the regulations. I think people always miss that. I think it's also about being aware that as you start looking for jobs, it's tempting to apply for lots and lots of different ones, but actually I would be sort of more focused with your approaches. Go for the jobs you actually want, and look at when they have essential and desirable characteristics, because that often lets you really draw out the skills you have. We tend to think of our research skills as sort of a big blob, but the more you tease them out, the more you think, actually, yeah, I'm really good at this. I can communicate, I can manage time, I can present. Stuff you really like doing is good. And I think also some people find coaching really helpful. I'm not a coach, but, and the standard of coach is also variable, but some people do find that helpful. If you're still in an institution doing a master's, make use of everything your university has before you leave. They have things on writing, they have things on, the library is always a brilliant source. Your supervisors, take advantage of everything. And I think ask questions. Generally, people are helpful. If you don't know, ask within that. I'm not sure that fully answers your question, so if you want more specific stuff, then ask.
Thank you. We had a number of questions about training. Natalie asked, is training in sort of the classical sense the solution, because the training is kind of soft skills can be quite difficult, and others ask, can you formally teach all of these things, or it's best learned through another way? And are there any kind of tips you can give on how to kind of get people interested in this type of training? A number of people said, well, I'm kind of responsible for training people in this sort of thing, but it's really hard to get them to attend.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try and do those in order. So, Natalie's correct, and I really like this question. It's that I think in the classical sense of, yes, if we sit down and say, here's how to write a good email, that's boring and you'll forget it in 5 minutes. So a lot of it isn't that you're having a sort of sit down teaching session. It's that it's kind of, as Natalie has said here, that it's modeling, that it's, it's an ongoing thing, that it's practice based, it's iterative. It's also that you're going back over and over and over it. So you're learning from experience. But I think what we're having at the moment is, because it's seen as a soft skill and it's assumed people, for example, if you think about a lot of younger students, it's assumed because they're extremely online, they know how to do an email. But actually what they'll often do is they will misspell things, they will be very informal, they will leave things out, and then they get upset when they don't get replies. So you actually might need to set out, here's how to do it well, here's how you might not do it so well. I think real world examples really help, showing people, would you do your email this way, or would you advertise your study in this way? Here are some examples of absolutely horrendous calls for participants. What can you see that's wrong? People feel better, I think, when they can highlight the stuff. And then I think you need multiple ways of remembering. So it's the supervision, it's regular catch-ups, it's reviewing stuff, it's being able to ask questions. It's also having additional resources. So checklists are really brilliant, particularly again for people with executive functioning issues, but also anyone with memory issues. Having videos, having people going through stuff and just going back over it. And if you want to sort of keep it going, refreshing people's minds, that the people who are getting good at this stuff come back and train year on year the people who are new. Harder in organizations where there's a lot of movement. And I think your point about making people interested in it, yeah, it's a challenge, because people either think that it's patronizing, it's like, well, of course I know that stuff, or that it's you know, you already know that, or that it's dull. So I think some of it is that you need to think around and maybe some worked examples. And I'm happy to do a future session if you want me to, on how we might do this using calls for participants as an example, because that's really hard to get people to come on. They think they know it, but actually you can make that really quite lively. I'm aware, again, I'm sort of jumping over this. So if people want to contact me afterwards to talk about this in more depth, you know, I'm happy to. I did want to just go back. There's an anonymous attendee saying, can we have the data support list of who's disadvantaged? So, I mean, you know, I've got a handout you'll be getting with reading on it. And there's also a lot of this in the Being Well in Academia book. But I think we know, for example, with the example I gave for the LGBTQ scholars being left out with the how to support and also how to instruction, that there's a growing range of publications basically about, you know, what happens when people can't get to conferences, you know, what happens, you know, around it. So I think the question here is kind of wrong, and I'm always slightly unsure about when we ask it like this, is how many people are disadvantaged, and isn't everybody disadvantaged? Yes, they are, but some people are disadvantaged in different ways. So it's not that it's more than or worse than, even though it can be that. It's that we need to focus on the how-tos generally, and then specifically in terms of how they're needed. So, for example, for me, I don't just need to know how to do the research, but I would need that information in different formats, and I'd need to be told more than once, and I'd need it in checklists, and I'd need a supervisor to go back to make sure I knew how to do it. So, you know, another person might just need to have a one-off training session and they're flying. It really would depend on our specific, you know, individual needs, disabilities, life experiences, and whatever.
Thank you so much. I think we're time for one very quick answer to one final question. And Tegan asks, what if you're not responsible for training? What if you don't have, you know, formal responsibility stuff? What can you do to raise awareness of these issues with colleagues who do supervise, who have responsibilities for making change?
I think it's difficult because it's labour on your part, and it shouldn't have to be. But I think if you can work with other colleagues who are a bit more senior, for starters, it helps. And what you really are looking at is what is already on offer. What are your funding? If you're funded, what's the funding councils expecting you to be given? What's the university stipulating, the regulations they're providing? If training is being offered, double check it actually is there, because quite often now, because a lot of people aren't going to in-person events, it's online. So it'll be archived there, but you might need directing and signposting to it. And I think if you've got departments who are offering training, whether you're in a charity or you're working in a council or you are a postgraduate or you're an early career researcher, ask your professional bodies. Things like, you know, here today, you can message and say, we'd really like training on this. And I'm sure that there could be future webinars, you know, with pleasure organised for you. Sorry, James, I've just signed you up for more work there. But
no, as our subscribers will know, we're looking to do more on research culture in the coming year. And a lot of the topics you've raised today, particularly these soft skills, I think something we should definitely have a conversation about. So I'm afraid, in order to keep time, I have to close Petra's session there. Petra, thank you so much. It was a fascinating talk. It's really got people enthusiastic and fired up. I'm sure the following talks will do the same. For those who were unable to answer your many questions, we are keeping a record of this, and we'll see what we can do to follow up. And everyone who's commenting and putting resources and questions in the chat, thank you so much. These discussions are really valuable, and everything, it's not just the content from the speakers that informs the work of the UK Rio following the conference, it's also your contributions and attendees. So thank you. And Petra, thank you again. It was great to hear your perspective and experience today.
Thank you.